Oh, hello. Didn't see you there. Uh, welcome to another edition of Dave's Faves, and obviously, this time we'll be talking about one of my favorite films as a kid that I first saw when I was a couple months away from being 6 years old. And that movie would be Spaceballs. No, of course not. It's Ghostbusters 2. I have a Ghostbusters 2 jacket. By the way, this jacket is apparently one of the jackets that the crew had. It was a birthday gift found on eBay. So it's got Coca-Cola over here because Coca-Cola owned Columbia Pictures at the time. And then the logo here and the logo on the back that I showed there. There's also a tag in here that basically says it's just Columbia Pictures. There's no fashion designer there or anything here. And I'm standing in a weird place because recently got this Ghostbusters 2 poster here. Not actual poster sized, it's a bootleg. I actually ordered it in April, and it just got here like a week ago because unbeknownst to me at the time I purchased it just from Amazon, it's from Shanghai, China. So, it was kind of stuck in customs for a while because, that's where the pandemic started. So, it was stuck in Shanghai. But finally got it because apparently they cleared that the poster, the bootleg Ghostbusters 2 poster I ordered, is perfectly fine. So, I got that hanging up now. So, the last Dave's Faves episode I did, it was on Escape from LA, a sequel that I love, a lot of people hate, and I understand why people hate it, even if I disagree with them. Ghostbusters 2 is a sequel that, for the life of me, I just can't understand why people dislike it so much. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This might be a long video, I apologize if it is, but I really fucking love Ghostbusters 2. So, I'm going to go sit down in my normal place there, and we'll continue this. Alright, so let's talk about Ghostbusters 2. The original Ghostbusters comes out in 1984. If you want some of the backstory on that, but you don't want to get really, really into the nitty-gritty details, there's a show on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us. It's like 20 minutes. It goes over the basic high-level overview of that film's production and all that stuff. But it comes out in 84. Big hit. It's such a big hit that there is a cartoon spin-off. That cartoon spin-off, The Real Ghostbusters, to differentiate it from the 1960s or 70s TV show, and then the cartoon spin-off that they did of that one, that was contemporaneous to The Real Ghostbusters. I was a big fan of both, by the way. Remember that, Let's Go Ghostbusters, let's go, I had toys from both. Anyway. So, The Real Ghostbusters, really popular, had a very popular toy line, all that stuff. So, Ghostbusters was a big hit. It was rated PG because there was no PG-13, even though there was a ghost blowjob in that movie. And then the cartoon sort of expanded the fan base to a younger crowd. So then, they want a sequel. I know that some of the people involved with the first one didn't really want to do a sequel, but, merchandising, all that stuff, they were going to do it. So, you got the team back together, and the movie happens. Comes out in June of 1989. It's a hit, but not as big as a hit as the first one. And part of the reason for that is probably because it was only like 1 week after that Tim Burton's Batman came out, and that was sort of a more meteoric film because the only other adaptation of Batman in recent people's memories was the 1960s Adam West campy show, so making it dark and brooding and film noir-y, it was a big hit. Also saw that in the theater, by the way, 2 months before I turned 6. Too young for probably both of these movies, but that's fine. So, Ghostbusters 2 comes out. Now, I should probably say that for the longest time, I did not realize that a lot of people do not like Ghostbusters 2. I was always under the impression, and maybe it was just because in my own myopic view, I love Ghostbusters 2, but I just thought that it was considered like a really good sequel that is, maybe not better than the first one, but on par or a totally legitimate sequel. Especially because people have always been clamoring for Ghostbusters 3. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But we never got a Ghostbusters 3, but I figured, why would people want a Ghostbusters 3 if they didn't like Ghostbusters 2? They would usually just say, stop at that, you got one shitty sequel or whatever. So I always thought, Ghostbusters 2 was as universally beloved as I felt about it. And also the fact that HBO, when I was a kid, also played Ghostbusters 2 a lot more than they played the first Ghostbusters. So growing up, I just ended up watching the second one more than the first one. I wasn't old enough to see the first one in theaters because I was 1, but saw the second one in theaters, and then I probably watched Ghostbusters 2 more than I watched the original Ghostbusters as a kid, just because it was on TV more. Though I ended up, of course, loving both in the cartoon series back then. But so it was only really around when the horrible 2016 Ghostbusters Answer the Call was coming out that I started to realize how disliked Ghostbusters 2 was. I mean, you have, like, the guys on Red Letter Media were saying, like, Ghostbusters 2 sucks, and Honest Trailers was like, but before 2016 Ghostbusters ruined it, Ghostbusters 2 ruined it. And I'm like, what? Fuck you, it didn't ruin anything. And so at that point it started to sort of seep into me that Ghostbusters 2 was not very well liked. And at the time, prior to watching the 2016 reboot, which I hated, and I've talked about that in other videos, I rewatched both Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 to see if both films hold up and whatever, because after there was like the backlash to 2016, and then there was the backlash to the backlash, where some people were saying like even the first one's not even good. What the fuck are you Ghost Bros talking about? And there were like legitimate like alt-right assholes who hated that movie for illegitimate reasons before the movie even came out, and we could see it for ourselves and see that it sucked. So I wanted to see if the movies hold up or if it was just, nostalgia goggles, but no, both movies really hold up well. And then prior to making this video, which I wanted to make because July 1st of this year is what they're calling Ghostbusters Day, which I don't understand because neither film was released on July 1st at all. But there was a Ghostbusters Day that was scheduled in June. They pushed it back because of the George Floyd stuff, the protests and whatnot. But on July 1st, the original Ghostbusters is being re-released in drive-ins and the few brick-and-mortar theaters that are open. The original Ghostbusters gets re-released in theaters on a fairly regular basis. I'm actually surprised I've never seen it in the theater myself. Never re-released Ghostbusters 2, though. But I wanted to do that. But a couple weeks ago, I watched, I have the steel book that has 1 and 2 in it. I don't have a 4K player, but the first movie's in 4K and the other 2 are on Blu-ray. So I revisited Ghostbusters 2 prior to this to be like, you know what, let me just give it one more shot and see if it's bad. And it's not. Ghostbusters 2 is awesome. I unlike Escape from LA, I legitimately don't get what people don't like about this movie. But I have heard people articulate why they say they don't like the movie. Bill Murray, for instance, the main reason we never got a Ghostbusters 3, so fuck you, Bill Murray, you can make Garfield and a bunch of shitty Wes Anderson movies, but you didn't want to make Ghostbusters 3 when Harold Ramis was still alive. He said, like, oh, the special effects guys took over, or it was too kiddie to go with the TV show. And I'm like, no, I mean, Ghostbusters 2 still has legitimate moments that are quote-unquote scary. I mean, not scary if you're an adult or whatever. But the thing that the original Ghostbusters had that 2016 didn't get is that Ghostbusters takes place in a universe that is mostly a serious horror universe, and it's the individual characters that are comedic within that serious universe. So characters like Walter Peck and the hotel manager or whomever during the first ghost busting thing with Slimer, those people are mostly playing it straight, and a lot of other characters are playing it straight within. They're not over the top goofy comedic characters, and there's certainly no fucking kung fu action sequence in Times Square. And Ghostbusters 2 continues that, where there are moments that legitimately work as like a child-friendly or a family-friendly horror film in the vein of like a Gremlins or something, not like Monster House or something, where there's the slime monster that comes out of the bathtub and roars, Janosch as the woman with the pram who kidnaps Oscar, just Oscar in a runaway baby carriage that could get hit at any time by a car. That opening sequence is pretty suspenseful. The river of slime reaching up to grab Ray. Like the Scoleri brothers is comedic, or the Titanic just arrived. There's obviously comedy stuff in there. The movie's a comedy, but there's parts of it that are legitimate, that are played straight and are legitimately scary, or just a lot of stuff with Vigo when he first possesses Ray toward the end, and he has the red eyes and everything, and I, Ray, and Vigo will rule the earth. And there's stuff that was kind of scary to 5-year-old David, and is played totally straight, or even like the photographs in the dark room and they just catch on fire and they can't get out of the room. All that stuff's played straight, and it's not cartooned up. So I don't quite get that. But I mean, Bill Murray's Bill Murray. I mean, whatever. Supposedly he's an asshole in real life, but I mean, he's a very funny actor. He's done a lot of great movies, but so there's that complaint. I remember Honest Trailers had a complaint about the character of Janine turning, because she's a very sort of acerbic, almost like an Aubrey Plaza type, if we're making it contemporary, Brooklynite, and then the sequel makes her just like a really, really horny for Louis Tully, even though in the first movie she obviously has a crush on Egon. I can't really have much of a problem with that, because one assumes that Egon is fairly asexual. I mean, we'll see what happens with Ghostbusters Afterlife, where if he has a kid and grandkids, obviously he's not asexual. I shouldn't say obviously, but at some point he had sex. And then she just moved on. Plus, I judging by how Janine is portrayed in the sequel versus the first one, I'm pretty sure that most of my adult fetishes stem from Janine and Ghostbusters 2, but I'm not going to talk more about that here. So I don't have much of a problem with that. And the film is true to the characters as they are in the first movie. It's not like the characters completely change from who they are, and neither does the universe, or the problem that it solves, but perhaps I should talk about plot then. So, obviously, first movie, scientists, they get fired from academia, so they start their own business. By the way, I am aware that the original Ghostbusters is a right-wing libertarian film that's the EPA is a villain. But me, super lefty commie, still loves the movie, even though I disagree with the movie's politics. Get that out of the way. And then they face sort of a demon named Gozer, and then there's sort of like sub-villains within it. I don't want to say Ghostbusters is weak on the villain, but Gozer's not much of a villain. That's probably why the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and the Terror Dogs get more attention for villains in the movie, or even the Library Ghost in the first or second act, than Gozer does, because Gozer just kind of looks like a Grace Jones 80s jazzercise person. Though I guess Enchantress from Suicide Squad was always kind of ripping off Gozer. And Ghostbusters 2 has a stronger villain, I would say, even though Vigo doesn't do as much in and of himself, but Vigo the Carpathian, where the plot of the movie is basically that 5 years after the original Ghostbusters, despite the fact that the Ghostbusters have saved New York, people think it was like a hoax or that they were brainwashed or whatever. I mean, you can talk about fake news and people not believing what's right in front of them and all that stuff today. So people did have a problem with that. People did have a problem with Ghostbusters 2 starting off from that point. They were like, if these people saved us from a giant marshmallow man and there's plenty of footage of this and then people were chanting, why do people suddenly think they're frauds? Well, people can kind of spin that, especially because something so unbelievable you could imagine they would release hallucinogens or whatever. But also because the point of Ghostbusters is not that they're like superheroes or anything, something the 2016 one got wrong in their third act. They're supposed to be like poor, down on their luck, just schlubs. They're supposed to be like exterminators or plumbers. They're not supposed to be action heroes. So it makes sense that you bring them low and then you raise them up again as they once again save the day. But regardless, so they're down on their luck. I do love where the characters are in their lives. Like, Peter Venkman becomes like a game show host, and Dana in the first movie talks about him. Well, a talk show host, not a game show host. But Dana compares him to a game show host in the first movie, so I like that he's still got into television. Egon is still running legitimate scientific experiments. What happens when we take away the puppy? That's the thing. Ghostbusters 2 is just as quotable as Ghostbusters. There's some really great lines in the film. Ray runs an occult bookstore. That's something Dan Aykroyd would probably do now. post like Nothing But Trouble, as well as performing for like kids' birthday parties, and it's the same with Winston. So I like that it sort of starts off there. The one legitimate gripe I have with Ghostbusters 2 is the character of Dana Barrett goes from being a concert cellist to an art restorer in 5 years. Unless she previously was a double major in music and art restoration in college, there's no way you can just jump into art restoration after you give up concert cellists. You can't just, you need a college degree to restore art. Probably more. You probably need a master's to do that, I think. I haven't looked it up yet. So the fact that but you need her to be there for the plot to happen. So that's the one. They probably could have written that a little bit better, or found a different way to introduce that, but whatever. But she's either separated or divorced from her husband, who I think is the guy she walks out of the concert with in Ghostbusters 1. And then Peter talks to her and they talk in front of that fountain. I think it's meant to imply that one scene is who she married. But yeah, she had dated Peter Venkman. It didn't work out. She married this other guy. That also didn't work out. And now she's raising Oscar alone as a newborn baby, pretty much. And then after the cart seems to go across out of nowhere, of course she contacts her old paranormal friends to see if anything weird happens because, physics, that wouldn't happen to a baby. And then through various plot machinations, the Ghostbusters find a river of slime that is under the city. And that is causing various supernatural events, and you later find out that it's feeding off of all the anger and negative feelings of New York City. Something I really like that idea. Obviously, New York in 1989, it was not the super violent hellhole that it is from Taxi Driver or Joe Spinell and Maniac, but it's still not as cleaned up and Disneylandish as it became later. So I like the idea that it's humans' own negativity and negative feelings that are fueling the evil, and that if we just loved it, I kind of it's sappy, but I kind of like that idea. And the River of Slime is tied to a evil warlord whose spirit is trapped in a portrait of him named Vigo the Carpathian. And he uses the head of the museum's, I think, Janusz? Peter McNichol, by the way. Love him in this movie, doing a weird Polish accent. And the idea is to find the child, who is going to be Oscar, Dana Barrett's kid, to put his soul into so that he can reign over modern day. Why he needs to be in a child when he has these other powers, I don't know, but sure, it's a possession movie, or a wannabe possession movie. So I like that. I think Vigo is he has some good lines. What is it? On a tower of skulls in the Palace of Pain, I sat on a throne of blood, something like that. Max von Sydow does the voice, even though a different actor who was in John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness later actually plays the character. And you get... The movie just has a lot of great moments in them, and the moments are so great that some of the lines are great that's what makes me not understand why people don't like this. Maybe the lines aren't famous to other people. Like, for instance, if I had to pick a favorite line, it is from the character of Janusz. There's a scene where he's walking through and checking on all of his employees' work. And he walks by and he's like, to one person, he goes, "Everything you're doing is bad. I want you to know this." And just that line, the pause, and then the follow-up is something I've used in my personal life way too many times. But there's other slight things in there, like "Suck in your guts, guys" for the Ghostbusters. When all of the Ghostbusters are suited up and they go to test the painting in the museum. What happens when we take away the puppy? When Egon is doing his tests there. Valentine's Day, bummer. Hairless cats, weird. I could list my favorite lines from this movie forever. And even some of the scary, probably the scariest scene in the movie, I think, is Winston, Egon, and Ray go into the abandoned train tunnels to try and find the River of Slime, because they're not going through the hole that they dug and got trouble for earlier. and they start to like echo, and then Winston yells something and it doesn't echo, and then there's a dark voice that says Winston, and then suddenly like a bunch of decapitated heads on pikes, like it's Cannibal Holocaust or Cannibal Ferox comes up. It was like, for a PG movie, that was like pretty scary, and then like a ghost train and everything. I don't know. That's fun. The movie gives Winston a little bit more to do, so I like that. But I think the movie does what it's supposed to do well, which is it takes these characters, it makes them underdog schlubs again. They have this problem, and they sort of do some detective work to solve it, and then they have to figure out the way to defeat the evil, which is sort of, they end up using positive energy from recalibrated slime and stuff. And you still have the fun, over-the-top stuff. You have the Statue of Liberty, which, you know, as far as I know, doesn't have knee joints, so probably couldn't walk the way it does in the movie. So you have the Statue of Liberty coming in. You bring back Lewis, and he thinks he's a Ghostbuster, and he's firing at the Jell-O around the building and everything. And yeah, it has a nice little structure to it, and it has a good mystery. You keep the stakes serious, even as the characters are comedic. You have fun little character moments, like, I think it's Egon and Ray, or it might be Winston and Ray. I forget. No, it's Egon and Ray. They're in the dark room, and before everything goes on fire, they're trying to discuss what they want to have for dinner, and like, Thai, too spicy, Mexican, Mexican there. It's sort of a nice little character moment there. And then you have sort of the subplot of Venkman trying to woo Dana again during this whole thing, and I think that works well. You see that Venkman is good with children, and the way he like talks to the baby, and you sort of see that these two people, even though it didn't work out originally, they do still have very strong feelings for each other, and all that stuff. Just thinking about this movie makes me happy. And that's how I know that it's a good movie, at least to me. But normally, I can take my own opinion out of something, and I can understand why other people don't like it. Like, I mean, that's kind of why I did Escape from LA before this. It's like, I love that movie, but I legitimately understand why people don't. I understand that it's more over the top and cartoony and broad, and it's just kind of a soft reboot and all that stuff. And I understand that. I disagree with it, but I totally understand it. It's a totally valid, different opinion than mine. But I don't understand why people don't like Ghostbusters 2. And to a certain extent, it's maddening to me, because like, it's not nostalgia goggles. It's not like Howard the Duck, a movie I liked as a kid and does not hold up at all. I still like Howard the Duck, but it doesn't hold up. I watched this recently. I watched it 4 years ago in 2016. I watched it again like 2 weeks ago in 2020. I watched it a million times as a kid. Obviously, that's the nostalgic part. It still holds up. It is still a very, very solid sequel. And, you know, does it work as the sort of mystery horror movie it is? Yeah, it has those serious moments. It has some really good set pieces. It has good effects. Does it work on a character level? Sure. The characters are still very much in line with who the characters are in the original movie. You have the subplot with Venkman, so you do have personal stakes in there. Egon is maybe a little bit broader in this movie. I'm thinking of mostly two jokes. There's one where they're in the courtroom and they're doing the Do Re Egon, again, quotable again, and then he gives like a little like kind of like smirk, like, and then there's when they have the tub of pink slime just before they put in the toaster. There's Venkman makes a reference, and it's sort of implied that Egon may have tried to have sex with the slime. Because he looks kind of embarrassed there, which, I mean, for a guy who collects spores, molds, and fungus, he'd probably fuck that slime, right? Rip Harold Ramis. And so it still has those legitimate moments, and yeah, I'd say the creature effects are great. I mean, it's 1989, so it's still mostly, you know, practical and stuff. That, as far as I know, they didn't use any CGI or computer effects. It's mostly matte paintings and opticals and stuff like that. You still have good creatures and good monsters. You have a pretty strong or visually strong villain. You have a funny little henchman there. Yeah, Dana's played straight as well. The Sigourney Weaver character, just like in the first movie, is played completely straight. I mean, she makes jokes herself, but she's never cartoony. In fact, honestly, the only characters I would describe in the movie as cartoony, aside from maybe like Cheech with the Better Late Than Never when the Titanic arrives, are Lewis and Janine. And while I can understand if somebody thinks that Janine shouldn't have been as cartoony in the movie compared to how she is in the first one, I can kind of agree with that, even though I obviously have feelings for Janine in Ghostbusters 2. Louis Tully, he was the most cartoony part of the original Ghostbusters, so that's just sort of in keeping with it. Or even, I mean, I guess you can argue that maybe it's a little too, the movie's leans a little too much into late 80s hip-hop with Run DMC doing their Ghostbusters, though I do like that song. Or Bobby Brown has a cameo in it, and Bobby Brown has a couple songs in it, but, I like Higher and Higher. That's a good song. I mean, yeah, the Ray Parker Jr. Ghostbusters, I mean, they still play that during the closing credits. You still get that song. And I forget who did the score for Ghostbusters 2. Part of me wants to say it's Alvin Silvestri. Is it on here? No. Oh yeah, by the way, I showed this already, but this was a nice little package here. Don't know if they still sell it. Probably do. But I think it's Alvin Silvestri. I don't know. I'll look it up after this, and I'll kick myself if it's not. So it works musically. I think the visual style, it's still very naturalistic. It still is par for the course with the first one. It still obviously takes place in the same universe. Yeah, I don't get it. And then the big set pieces really work. The courtroom scene with the Scoleri brothers. You have the judge is a little cartoony too. He's the over-the-top, burned at the stake. I really like that courtroom scene. I remember the YouTuber, this is like the third other YouTuber I'm mentioning now. The YouTuber Legal, he did he rated like the accuracy of the Ghostbusters 2 courtroom scene, and it ended up coming out not that inaccurate as far as what the Ghostbusters are charged with and everything. I mean, Lewis being a tax attorney who's drifted in, I mean, the movie's still a comedy, right? But that's saying with the Scoleri brothers, they look great. They're obviously like put in post, but they're still like physical animatronic things they built, and they're flying around. They have to fire up and do that. It works as the end of the first act where they're back in business. It works as a comedic scene. It works for special effects. I mean, that scene is beautiful. It works great. I mean, the River of Slime, even they're lowering Ray down, and Egon and Venkman are they're putting on like over-the-top New York accents, pretending that they work for Con Ed. Yo! Like, I think of this movie, and it makes me chuckle because it's fucking funny. Like, the people who don't like this movie, do they not like it just because it's a sequel and they think it's not as good as the first one? Well, almost every sequel's not as good as the first one. The list of sequels that are better than the first one is it's not as short as people think it is, but it's still pretty fucking narrow. Do they think it's not funny? I'm just going to disagree with you. I think it's very funny. Is it not as well made? Are there too many creature effects? I mean, the first movie has a lot of creature effects. There's a zombie taxi driver, Slimer's 2 appearances, the I believe it's magic scene. I'm singing too much in this one. The open the fridge and Zool and all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of effects in that one. I mean, I'd say the level of effects is probably similar. Maybe Ghostbusters 2 is a bit more. I do know that the fur coat that comes to life, which is a favorite of a lot of people's, they originally wanted to put that in the first movie and they couldn't find a place for it, so they put it in here. I think that works some. So I think that works fine. I think the climax works great. They break into there. He's Vigo, you're like the buzzing of flies to him, and they have to use the good slime to defeat him. I also think that really works well as far as the Vigo picking up the baby, and it seems scary, and they're like melding a little bit. And he's all like, "Now we become one." And I also remember the dialogue. I think the dialogue's great. As far as if you're going to do a sequel to a big popular movie, I think Ghostbusters 2 is a great way of doing it if you're not going to do like something metafictional like Gremlins 2 does, another sequel I like more than the original. Not that I like Ghostbusters 2 more than Ghostbusters 1. I think they're about equal. Maybe I like Ghostbusters 2 a little bit more. But, nah, they're about equal. But, like, yeah, Gremlins 2 went metafictional and went really broad. Or Back to the Future 2. I'm not going to say Back to the Future 2 is better than Back to the Future 1. It's not. But it's still very close, and that goes in, like, a different direction. So Ghostbusters 2 doesn't go in a completely different direction, and maybe people wanted that, but it still feels within the same universe, and it doesn't feel like a soft reboot. It doesn't feel like Ghostbusters again. There's enough differences in how it's plotted out that I think it works as its own movie. So I guess the reason I wanted to make this video and talk about Ghostbusters 2 for so damn long is because despite all of the people who don't like Ghostbusters 2, and those who have articulated reasons, I've listened to those reasons, and I reject them. Like, it's not like Escape from LA. I'm listening to reasons, I'm like, no, that's not a valid reason why it's not good. But most of the people who diss this movie are just like, Ghostbusters 2 fucking sucked. I'm like, how? How do you not like this movie? So, I don't know. The point is, I really love Ghostbusters 2. It's quotable, it's funny, it works in the serious universe it takes place in, but the characters are still funny, the characters are still true to who they are, minus maybe Janine. Yeah, I just fucking love it. So, if you haven't seen Ghostbusters 2 in a long time, maybe you watched it once and you're like, that's not a good sequel, but it was many years ago, give it another shot. If for some reason you love Ghostbusters and avoided the sequel for some reason, watch Ghostbusters 2. I don't know if there's anyone who's actually like that, but watch it. I mean, Ghostbusters 2 is better than the cartoon series. I tried rewatching the cartoon series. It doesn't hold up very well. Still, I mean, nostalgia goggles. I still loved it as a kid. I still have a soft spot for it. But I tried watching a couple episodes because it was on Netflix, and it doesn't really hold up. So, alright, so after Ghostbusters 2 came out, because it seems that consensus was that it wasn't good, and Bill Murray really didn't like it for some reason, there was no Ghostbusters 3 for a long time. Dan Aykroyd wanted to do one. I think Ivan Reitman may or may not have wanted to do one as well. I'm not quite sure on Ivan Reitman. But, Bill Murray famously refused to do it. And so it never got made. I mean, the closest thing we got to Ghostbusters 3 was the video game, which came out for the last generation of video game systems. It came out for PS3 and Xbox 360 was the last one? Yeah. There's a remastered version you can buy on PS4 and Xbox One now. But, of course, now the next generation's coming out soon, so alright. But that's a really fun video game. The cutscenes and the story-wise, all of the actors, including Bill Murray, came back to revoice their characters. Sigourney Weaver didn't come back for Dana Barrett, so Dana's not in it. But otherwise, everyone else from the movie is in it. Even Walter Peck comes back and stuff. Has a pretty decent story. I mean, obviously, it's a video game and not a movie, so there's caveats to how much it can be a movie-like. But it tells a good story. The story ties into Ghostbusters 1 more than Ghostbusters 2, aside from the fact that Vigo the Carpathian's painting is in it, and Vax von Sydow recorded like 5 lines for it. It kind of ignores Ghostbusters 2, which I'm upset about. I feel like Ghostbusters 2 just needs more fucking respect. But otherwise, the video game is good, and it's, even Harold Ramis was in there, so it's the closest thing to a to a true Ghostbusters 3 we're ever going to get. And I think it was based on one of Dan Aykroyd's scripts, like Ghostbusters in Hell or something like that. But yeah, I like that. If you've never played the video game or you're not into video games, I think there's YouTube compilations where you can just watch the 2.5 hours of cutscenes and it's almost a movie. So go do that. And then the franchise has sort of stayed alive thanks to merchandise, people who collect things. Almost every state, maybe even there are multiple groups, but there are always cosplayers. Like there's a Ghostbusters of North Carolina. They go to a couple conventions. I've met a couple of them. They gave me a card to join, but they don't live in the Triangle, and dressing up like a Ghostbuster and handing out food on the weekends is stuff to do. But it's still cool. So, I mean, there's little Ghostbuster cosplay chapters all over. It's almost like what's that, 502 or whatever the Star Wars Legion is that dress up like stormtroopers and does charity. So that's cool. And obviously there's been comic books, there's been other video games that have come out. There was other cartoons. There was like Extreme Ghostbusters where Egon trains like a new generation of Ghostbusters. I mean, that could have been a Ghostbusters soft reboot spinoff at some point. They didn't do that, though. What we got was the shitty Ghostbusters 2016 we got that didn't understand how to do a Ghostbusters movie. That, you don't make it a Paul Feig The Heat or Spy type movie that inexplicably becomes an action movie in the third act because you have to kind of sell girl power. I mean, all the original Ghostbusters did is, they just stood there with their wands and fired. I mean, they're not like fucking twirling and shit. What the fuck? So, but I mean, most people don't like that movie, so it's gone by the wayside. Look, thankfully that didn't become anything. And now, because the reaction to that movie was so bad, combined with the fact that Sony is really thirsty for a franchise that is not partially owned by Marvel, we're getting a different soft reboot that takes place within the universe of Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Hopefully they don't ignore 2. That's Ghostbusters Afterlife. It should have been coming out in July, this month, when I finally upload this. But, COVID, so they pushed it back to, I think it's set to open in March 2021 right now. Unless, other shit changes with COVID. So we have a little longer to wait on that. But it's directed by Jason Reitman, the son of the director of 1 and 2, Ivan Reitman. Jason Reitman himself has made some really good movies. Juno, Tully, Young Adult. He's made a couple other not as good movies. I haven't seen, what's the movie? Men, Women, Children, I think, is the movie. Didn't see that one. Did he make Thank You for Smoking? I can't remember if Thank You for Smoking was Jason Reitman. That was a good movie if it was him. Should have looked this up before filming. Whatever. The point is, Jason Reitman's done some really good work. He's never really done anything quite like Ghostbusters. He mostly kind of does dramedies, I guess. He's done the couple movies with Diablo Cody writing, and everything. But I want to say that the genre he seems most comfortable in is dramedy. So for him to do Ghostbusters, I mean, it partially doesn't make sense because even though Ghostbusters is a comedy that takes place in a serious universe, it still does have like special effects and stuff, which Jason Reitman hasn't really done any type of movie like that. But at the same time, it kind of does make sense if you're trying to do that tone. Like if you take an almost dramedy tone and twist it a little bit, you can get the Ghostbusters universe where characters are funny, characters say lines and quips that are funny, but the tone of the universe is pretty serious. Like, just from the one trailer that's come out, it looks like maybe Paul Rudd might be not as broad as Louis Tully, but he might be the most comedic character in there. And then all the other characters are more or less kind of sort of less cartoony and they're more quippy. Like Finn Wolfhard playing, I guess, Egon's grandson. Though he seems to exude more Peter Venkman from the brief clips we've seen. The brief clips we've seen haven't actually had any jokes. From the footage in the trailer of Ghostbusters Afterlife, it looks like it's almost played like Stranger Things, obviously. Certainly the visual, almost not sepia tone, but almost like Dust Bowl color palette of the trailer makes it look like it's Stranger Things or It Chapter 1. I mean, something's popular, you rip off the stuff that's popular, so obviously it's gonna, you hire Finn Wolfhard and you make it look like Stranger Things, and you have some kids who aren't too precocious. I'm kind of optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic that Ghostbusters Afterlife will be good. It's not the Ghostbusters 3 we've been wanting, but it's a third film in this universe. So I'm also hoping that the original characters Obviously, Spangler, Harold Ramis has died, so Spangler can't be in it. But Venkman, Stans, Winston Zeddemore, Janine, and Dana Barrett, because I think she's also in it. And maybe there'll be an actor who plays grown-up Oscar as well, who knows. I hope that they're in it for more than, like, one scene. I mean, obviously there's no footage of them in the teaser trailer that's come out, but I'm hoping they don't just come in for 5 minutes and be like, "You go, kids," and then fuck off. I hope they play a little bit more into the plot, even if it's only like Harrison Ford in Blade Runner 2049, where he doesn't come in until the beginning of the third act. At least if they come in that late, let them stay for the whole third act. That's what I'm hoping. I'm kind of hoping Ghostbusters Afterlife is kind of similar in a sequel as Blade Runner 2049 is. Blade Runner 2049, by the way, I do like more than the original Blade Runner. I know, sacrilege. But I love Blade Runner 2049. And I love that movie had the balls to take the universe of Blade Runner and take it to its natural progression 30 years later. In that it had the balls to... It still incorporates Harrison Ford's Deckard. And it's still true to that character, but it has the balls to hold him until the beginning of the third act, and still not make it feel like you're shortchanging the audience. As far as if you're going to do a way too belated sequel, Blade Runner 2049 I think is the standard bearer for that. So I'm kind of hoping that Ghostbusters Afterlife, in relation to how it compares to Ghostbusters 1 and hopefully Ghostbusters 2, is that it's doing sort of the Blade Runner 2049 version of that. Where we spend most of the time with the new characters, but it still very much is embedded in the universe of the first or the original movies, and then the characters from the original that you love come back and play a substantial role in like the third act. That's what I'm hoping. Jason Reitman, don't let me down. Yeah. I mean, we'll find out when the movie opens, which will be in March, unless COVID makes theaters and shit worse and it gets pushed back more. But that's my hope for that. So, this has been a long way around to basically say that I really, really love Ghostbusters 2, that I do not understand why people do not like Ghostbusters 2, because I think it is successful in all of the ways it's supposed to be. So, if you haven't seen Ghostbusters 2 in a while, give it a look. If you are honestly watching this video and you honestly do not like Ghostbusters 2, leave me a comment telling me why, because I'm genuinely curious as to what your reasons are. I may not agree or accept your reasons, but I'd like to know that, especially if they're none of the reasons I've given so far. I do know... When I watched Ghostbusters 2, I also watched it with the commentary track, because I think this is the first time Ghostbusters 2 has had a commentary track. The previous DVD did not, so I think this is the first time. The commentary track's not the best. There's a lot of gaps of silence. It's not one of those commentary tracks where they just describe what's happening on the screen. Those are really bad. Speaking of Spaceballs, the Mel Brooks's audio commentary Spaceballs is probably the worst one I've ever heard. The audio commentary on Friday the 13th Part 8 is also pretty bad. But there's a lot of gaps in the commentary and it doesn't give a lot of information. But I did listen to the commentary track, and I think Ivan Reitman, if I'm understanding him correctly, his only regret is that he thinks waiting 5 years was waiting too long for a sequel. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I'd say like the average sequel to a movie comes out between 2 and 3 years after the original. That's usually the general turnaround time for these things, especially if it's a blockbuster as the original Ghostbusters became. But 5 years I don't think is too long. And I think picking up the story 5 years later, I think it ended up working. But I can also understand if you think it's too late. But I think that's his. From what I glean from the audio commentary is that Dan Aykroyd thinks Ghostbusters 2 is good. And Ivan Reitman probably didn't think it was good for a while because he got negative feedback. But then as the years have gone on, the feedback has become more positive, and he's warmed up to it. My guess is Bill Murray doesn't like it, but fuck him. Ernie Hudson, I have no idea. I don't know, but of all of these people, Ernie Hudson's the only one who does conventions. I would have met him at a convention in Raleigh, except his plane came in late, so I didn't get a chance to. Otherwise, I was going to take a picture with him. But that's probably, if I got to meet him in person, I'd ask him what his true opinion of Ghostbusters 2 is, because he got more to do in that movie. In the first Ghostbusters, he was kind of an afterthought, because originally they were going to cast Eddie Murphy, and he ended up not doing it. So, yeah, and they never really built him up. He was just sort of the everyman who got hired on with these three scientists. Later on, they've retconned it a bit, and they've made him, I think he worked in the Air Force or something. They bulked up his credentials a bit more in some of the expanded universe. But based on just the movies, if you're just going to call those canon, he's just sort of the everyman who joins in for the paycheck. So I'd wonder about him, but I don't know. I love Ghostbusters 2, and that's why I've rambled on for way too long about it. 2 in the box, ready to go. We be fast and they be slow.